Welcome to Mr. Magazine, where every untold heartbeat of celebrity life is given a voice beyond the camera lights. Tonight's feature unveils a private fracture that became public heartbreak, a confession spoken in a voice that trembled the nation and set in motion a desperate journey across borders. Stay with us, like this story, subscribe to Mr. Magazine, and click join to support the channel that brings true human stories out from behind the headlines. For a decade, he had been the image of composed certainty, a man who carried himself as if the world were a stage and he its calmest actor. Fans memorized his steady smile, directors trusted the quiet gravity in his eyes, and magazines printed his portraits beside headlines calling him unflappable. Yet on an ordinary afternoon, beneath a cluster of indifferent microphones, Gökberk Yıldırım shed the armor he had worn for years. The confession that found his lips was neither crafted nor rehearsed, it arrived raw, urgent, and devastatingly human. "If I hadn't said those words, we would be married today." The sentence landed like an avalanche, and a country braced for the debris. Behind that fragile utterance lay an untold chronology of small gestures, silences, and a single argument that split two lives. The public had watched the couple's chemistry on screen and envied their off-screen tenderness, but only those nearest to them knew the private rhythms of worry and care that pulsed behind closed doors. Seamra, luminous and guarded, carried a burden of health and vulnerability she rarely disclosed. Gökberk, devoted yet human, found his strength tested not by fame but by fear, a fear that disguised itself as practicality and fled in the form of cruelly candid sentences spoken at a moment of weakness. Seamra did not announce her departure. She did not dramatize the end. Instead, she folded her life into careful, decisive steps and left for Europe in quiet privacy, clinging to a wish for distance and healing that would not be complicated by public sympathy or relentless speculation. Her words, when asked later by tabloids, were measured and sorrowful, that love sometimes proves itself by letting go. In public, she remained kind, in private, she preserved a line no one crossed. He watched her recede like the last light of day, helpless and silent, while regret sharpened into confession. Far from Istanbul, in a small rented apartment with a single window overlooking the sleep of Barcelona's narrow streets, Seamra watched him on a loop. The video of his interview played on her phone as if on a cruelly persistent loop, pausing at the exact moment when those words ruptured. She did not dissolve into immediate rage. Instead, she sat very still and allowed the vertigo of recognition to wash over her, a dizzying awareness that his voice was not an actor's performance but a man's raw plea. For the first time since she stepped on the plane away from everything familiar, there was an ache that felt like an opening. Yet the opening was not an invitation so much as an invitation to reckon. Inside her, two forces battled, memory and self-preservation. The memory, incandescent with tenderness, urged her to run to him and close the distance with a hug that would stitch the wound. The protective voice, trained by a childhood of caution and the bitter lessons of pain, warned that regret does not erase the history of injury. She rose slowly from the couch, caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and looked at a woman who had been brave enough to leave and wary enough to stay away. Tears did not fall immediately. Instead, a precise, private calculus began. Could she trust herself again to be the person who would weather more storms for love, or was her preservation now the truest act of love she could perform for herself? Social media, meanwhile, performed its ritual. Comment threads swelled with a mixture of pity and scorn. A roughly even split of viewers styled themselves as moral arbiters. Some labeled him the man who lost the woman of his life because of one ill-fated sentence, while others conjured melodramatic visions of a cinematic reconciliation on the Barcelona shoreline. Yet beyond the clamor, fans and strangers alike found their own reflections in this ancient human theater of regret and longing. For many, the story was not about celebrity at all but about the universal reality of loving imperfectly. Some nights later, they sat across from each other with miles of history between their hands. No crowd observed them. The conversation was an intimate exhumation of what had been said, what had been left unsaid, and the ways in which fear had masqueraded as practicality. At times, their voices trembled. At times, they were unexpectedly steady. He spoke of cowardice disguised as pragmatism. She spoke of the private courage it had taken to leave. Neither sought absolution. Instead, both began the slow work of naming the wounds and acknowledging what remained. Public reaction, as always, arrived in waves. The press reported cautiously now, some outlets framing the meeting as a possible reconciliation, others noting that the embrace of old intimacy does not guarantee a future together. In the quiet that followed, mutual friends offered measured relief. Neither had attempted to exploit the moment for publicity. Instead, they had chosen the harder path, a real encounter with consequences. For those who had once admired them for their on-screen love scenes, there was a new respect for the less glamorous reality, two people negotiating the unglamorous aftermath of human failure. For the public, a lesson rippled through the discourse: human beings are complicated repositories of bravado and fragility, and a single phrase, spoken in haste, can reshape a lifetime. The discourse softened for some observers who had been quick to condemn. For others, the story remained a cautionary tale about the destructiveness of fear. On fan forums and in comment sections, a surprising common thread arose: a recognition that celebrity does not exempt one from the most ordinary of human errors. As the story quieted into the kind of memory that passes into the background of celebrity cycles, the most lasting image remained not a headline but a sequence of small, private gestures: a plane ticket purchased in desperation, a woman standing alone by a Barcelona window, a man confessing his fear without defense, two people sitting down to speak with the honesty that fame often steals from the world. Those images spoke to something older than celebrity, a human economy where regret, forgiveness, and the architecture of new trust are currency. Mr. Magazine closes this chapter by reminding its audience that compassion matters. Support the channel by subscribing to Mr. Magazine, pressing like, and clicking join to help us continue delivering narratives that illuminate the fragile truths behind public lives. Share your reflections in the comments to contribute to a conversation that values empathy over instant judgment. This account does not claim to answer whether destiny will orchestrate a reunion at the altar. What it does record is the undeniable truth that actions and words possess the power to shape lives, often in ways that no publicist can repair. Gökberk Yıldırım's confession was not a performance, it was a man reaching the end of his ability to perform. Seamra's choice to leave was not cruelty, it was survival. Between those two truths lies the possibility of renewal, or the quiet acceptance of what cannot be undone. Thank you for reading this Mr. Magazine exclusive. Remember to subscribe, like, and join to support stories told with care, and to keep following the human narratives that move us all. In the end, the most valuable currency is not fame but the capacity to learn, to apologize, and to try once more to love without breaking the other. Mr. Magazine, where human stories find their voice.